Welcome to section number 3. So this is Introduction to Optimization and Fluid Level and Dynamometer Test. And so what I want to talk about in this section, this is going to be a little bit introductory beginner, feel free to skip it, but I want to talk about the fluid level and dynamometer test and give you a high level overview because we're going to go into depth on these in the next 5 sections after this section here. And I want to tie that in the feedback that we get from wells or the data that we get from wells that ties into optimization. We can use that to optimize our wells. So we're going to look at some examples of the feedback you get and how you can apply that with respect to optimization. So that's what we're going to discuss right here. And that ties into our next slide. So what is rod pumping optimization? When we talk about optimizing a well, what are we actually trying to optimize? Have you ever thought about that? So what is an oil company trying to optimize? So a lot of people have the misconception that an oil company's goal is to produce as much oil and gas as possible, and that is not their goal. They have the same goal as any company, which is to try and maximize profitability, right? As long as you're doing that in a legal, ethical, and moral manner, you want to maximize profitability. And if we look at the equation for profit right here, it's quite simple. You have money coming in, called revenue, which is going to be from the sale of oil and gas. But then you have money going out, which is due to expenses, which is what is required in order to produce that oil and gas. Okay, so the expenses are going to include everything from renting the office building to paying the electricity for the office building, the engineers, buying the trucks for your field personnel, paying for your health insurance, paying for electricity for the pumping units, paying for workovers when you have a failure downhole. So everything goes into this category right here. And so an oil company does not just want to maximize their oil and gas production. That's just their revenue side of this equation. We want to maximize the profitability. So we have to take into account the expenses side right here. And if you were to think about this from a personal finance point of view, this is what we would call savings, right? So you get a paycheck from your employer that comes in usually twice a month, something like that. That's your revenue. And then you have the expenses for everything else in your house, to pay for your house, to pay for your food, electricity for your kids, to put food on the table. That's going to be your expenses. Whatever is left over from what's coming in minus what goes out, that's what we usually call savings. And that's what we can save for a rainy day. We can invest in the stock market. We can do whatever we want with. But that is what an oil company is trying to maximize. That is optimizing a well, is if you can optimize the profitability. So that's what it is for the whole oil company. And of course, if you look at an individual well, we want to maximize the profitability of that particular well. So let me give you some illustrations here as to how you can optimize here. So in this illustration, we've got these 3 oil barrels, and this represents the revenue that we're getting from selling oil. You can also consider this to be revenue from selling natural gas. Okay, but then we have the operational expenditures, OPEX, and I've got a fire on top of this to indicate to you that this is bad. This is money that is burning. So typically when you see a dollar bill, you think that's something good, but in this illustration, these are the expenses required in order to get this certain level of production from a particular well. Okay, so we have 3 units of currency and we have 3 barrels of production for a particular well. If we wanted to optimize this well, this would be the holy grail of optimization right here. If we could take a well that was in this situation and we could convert it to a well that was in this situation where we spend less, we're only using 2 units of currency here, and we're making more production. Okay, so we're not spending as much and we're actually getting more out of that particular well. So we're basically hitting this equation on both sides. This number is larger, this number is smaller. We're going to have greater profitability on that. And a good example of how you can do this, an easy example of how you can do this with the diagnostic tools that we're going to talk about, is if you find a well that has gas interference like this, you make note of that. You put a note in the wellbore diagram. The next time we pull it, we need to optimize or upgrade our downhole gas separator. It's not working adequately. The next time you pull the well, if you improve that gas separator and now you eliminate the free gas that's going into the pump intake, then you can have perfect 100% fillage cards. So in this particular example right here, you can get more production because if you have a well that has gas interference, you typically cannot pump that well off. So you cannot get the full production out of that particular well, but if we eliminate it, we can. So we get that extra barrel right here. And also we're going to do it more efficiently instead of having this inefficiency with our strokes where we're only getting maybe 60% effective displacement. Okay, the fillage is right here where it comes down to the 0 load line, and that looks to be about 50, 60, probably about 60% fillage in this particular card. That's inefficient. We want to take that efficiency up to 100%. Okay, so that is one example of how you could do that. Now, a lot of wells, you're not going to be able to do this because the wells are already getting their maximum production. And so this is what optimization looks like for those particular wells. So in this case, we're spending less, but we're producing the same. So we're still making this same 3 barrels of oil, but we're only using 2 units of our currency here. So we basically just became more efficient in the way that we were getting the same amount of production. And an easy way to illustrate this would be if you have a POC, if you were able to dial that POC in to minimize some of the damaging strokes, or if you were able to go around and find wells that were tagging and beating themselves up and to adjust the spacing on that rod string, or maybe you have a well that's just running aggressively fast and it doesn't need to, it's already pumped off. If you slow that down, you're probably going to extend the run life on that particular well, and you can get into this type of category of optimization here. We're still getting the same production, but we're going to do it with less expenses. So a third possibility as to how you can optimize your wells is not as obvious, and it looks like this, where you're producing less. So we're only producing 2 barrels here, but we're spending even less. We lost $2 of the dollars right here. So we've increased the profitability though. And that's ultimately what matters in this illustration. And an example of this might be a well that was on a rod pump that has lots of failures, and you actually convert it to another form of artificial lift where you don't make as much production on it. Maybe you go to plunger lift if that's applicable, or you go to gas lift, but maybe you go to a form of artificial lift where you can't get the bottom hole pressure as low, but you dramatically reduce the amount of expenses you have for that well, because with rod pump, if you have a very deviated well, rods rubbing on tubing is going to cause a lot of failures. You're going to have a rig on that well frequently. So maybe rod pump is not the best form of artificial lift. Or maybe you have a seating nipple set deep on a rod pumping well, and instead of having it set so deep where you have sand related issues or other problems down there, you raise that seating nipple up. So you're willing to give away some of your production, but in the process of giving away some of that production, we're dramatically reducing our expenses right here. And so when it comes to this sort of scenario, a phrase that came to mind, I heard this from a tax accountant on a podcast here, but he says, it's not how much money that you make, it's how much that you keep. And he was speaking with reference to paying taxes. So if you make a lot of money, but then you have to give a ton of it back to the tax man at the end of the year, well, all that matters is really what you keep in your pocket at the end after you pay that particular tax man. And this is what I was talking about here at the beginning, where a lot of people think that the goal of an oil company, a lot of oil companies even have production targets where they get certain bonuses if they reach a certain production rate. Well, that's only focused on the revenue side. Really, we should be focused, remember, on the whole equation, which is the profitability. It doesn't matter if you have a lot of money coming in, if you have a lot of money going back out. All that matters is what's left over in the end. And that's going to be our profitability right there. And actually, that brings another thing to mind. So if you remember during the pandemic, when the price of oil collapsed, sometimes optimizing a well's profitability means turning the well off. Okay, so when the price of oil was down there at $15, $20 a barrel, the best thing you could have done for a lot of wells is to turn the well off. Don't produce that particular well. In that particular month when the well's not producing, you're still going to have expenses, overhead expenses, and you're going to have no revenue because you're not making any production. But keep that oil down there in storage in the rock. Trust me, we can get it at a future date. And let's turn the well back on when the price of oil doubles 3 to 4 months later, and we can sell our oil for a better price. So sometimes when it comes to the profitability of the well, now if you're looking on a 1 month time scale, well, for those months you got negative profit, you're deep in the red. But if you were to look at the annualized profitability of that well, that would be a better scenario as opposed to selling your oil at such a discount at such a low price. So there's different ways of thinking about maximizing profitability here. And there's one more scenario here where I don't have all the icons generated for it, and it's with gas interference. So the best thing you can do with gas interference is you can take it from this state to where you eliminate the free gas in the pump and have 100% fillage, but you're not going to be able to do that until you pull the well and get the equipment out. And so if you've ever pumped wells with gas interference, you're probably pretty familiar with the fact that if you pump it harder through the gas interference, you're going to get more production. And so there's certain wells or certain scenarios where you want to pump that well harder, especially in a high price environment. So if the price of oil is $80 to $100 a barrel, you probably want to be more aggressive. So as you pump the well harder, you'll get more production, which is good, but you're also going to increase your expenses. But as long as you can increase the difference to where your revenue's more than the increase in the expenses, then you're going to be in the positive there. So another scenario to think about. But so these are just some of the things to think about here when it comes to maximizing or optimizing our profitability. But let's break this equation down. So how do we maximize our revenue? Okay, this is not a trick question. This is very simple. How do you maximize the revenue from a particular well? Well, you get all the production that you can. So everything that's coming into the well, we want to produce it. That's one aspect of it. Another thing you can think about it, if you like to think on a higher level, is you can try to maximize the price of what you're selling your oil and gas for. But ultimately, we're not going to have any control over that unless we are OPEC, right? Who can make big global decisions like that. So what we can do, though, is we can pray that OPEC is going to voluntarily cut their production rate to stabilize the price of oil, which is going to make our West Texas oil more valuable. So this is all we have here on the revenue side, is basically get our production. We don't really have any influence on the price of what we're going to sell it at. It is a global commodity. But when it comes to the other side, or the end of the equation right here, when it comes to expenses, how do we minimize our expenses? Well, we got a lot more leverage and things that we can do here to minimize our expenses. So we can reduce the failure rate, keep the pulling units off the well, don't have downhole failures. That's quite expensive. And of course, when you have a failure, you're not making any production until you get that well repaired, which could be a week, 2 weeks, something like that, where you're missing all the production from that particular well. You want to reduce wasted chemical or electricity, and that kind of ties in, at least the electricity, is you want to make every stroke count, and you want to make it count to the fullest extent. Again, we don't want to have gas interference. We want to have 100% fillage cards right here. And what we're going to talk a lot about in this course is how to make better informed decisions. And that's what we're going to kind of get a feeler for here in this section with our diagnostic tools. When we get feedback from the well, we can make better decisions, and therefore we're going to reduce our overall expense rate, and potentially we're going to maximize our revenue by increasing our production, by getting feedback from the well and adjusting the way that we operate that particular well, or adjusting our downhole equipment design. So anyways, this is how you optimize or maximize the profitability on a particular well. And we're going to use our diagnostic tools. So let me quickly detail on a high level what these two tools are. So this is the fluid level gun. Okay, you're going to attach this to the wellhead, to the casing right here. You can't see the well in this picture, but it looks the same as these others right here in the background. It's just screwed on right here to the casing. So here's the fluid level gun, and we're going to screw it onto the casing, and we're going to shoot a pressure pulse that is going to go down the annulus, and it's going to reflect off the top of the fluid level. But what we're able to do is we're able to interpret where's the top of the fluid level, how much fluid is above our pump intake, and also what are our bottom hole pressures, okay, when we take a fluid level shot. So a fluid level gun or a fluid level shot is going to tell us how efficiently is the well producing the reservoir. Okay, so it tells us kind of the reservoir producing efficiency. We're able to see if we're producing all of the fluid that is coming in from that reservoir, and if we are, that well would be so-called pumped off, which means the fluid level will be right down here at the pump intake. If we have a very high fluid level with lots of liquid in there, that means we have high bottom hole pressure, and therefore we're not producing the maximum efficiency on that particular reservoir. So that is what the efficiency the fluid level gun is telling you. So it tells you if you have additional production potential. As I just mentioned, you can see how much fluid is in there. Also, the fluid level gun, it's helpful when it comes to chemical treatment programs. And the reason for that is that typically we are introducing chemical from surface. We want that chemical to drop all the way down, get sucked up by the pump to go to the inside of the tubing to protect our rods and the ID of our tubing where most of our failures occur. And if you actually look in this image right here, this is a chemical injection line that's coming right in right here, and this is a line from the tubing, the so-called slipstream, where some of the produced fluid is circulating back down to help carry the chemical downhole as it falls down the annulus right here. But it's very helpful with that. If you're having issues with chemical treatments, you should look to see what does it look like down there on the backside if you're introducing chemical from surface, because for some reason it's not getting down and around, or it's not doing an effective job. But it's helpful with the chemical treatment program. Now, what about dynamometers? Okay, we've got two different types of dynamometers. You can see these are both from Ecometer. These are temporary installed dynamometers. This one's actually physically weighing the weight of the rod string. It's bearing the weight of it. It is sitting beneath the polish rod clamps. This one is interpreting the weight of the rod string by the change in diameter right here. This is the most popular because it's so easy to install and get good cards. And here's some dynamometer cards that come from a pump-off controller. Okay, so remember, we are measuring the load versus position at surface. Okay, this is going to be our surface card, and we're calculating what is happening downhole on our downhole pump card here. This represents what the fluid load is on the pump plunger, as it moves around through the stroke. So here's one of the dynamometers that we see right here. This is the wired version, but the dynamometer is looking down the rod string, okay, to the downhole plunger. And we're generating these two cards. Most people are focused here on this downhole pump card right here. So the fluid level gun's looking down the annulus. The dynamometer is looking down the rod string. They're looking down different sides of the well. And the dynamometer is going to tell you how effectively is the system operating. Okay, so it tells you the mechanical producing efficiency, all right, of the system right here. So remember, the fluid level gun's telling you how effectively you're producing the liquid or how effectively you're pulling down on the reservoir. The dynamometer is telling you how effectively are you doing this mechanically. So you can see in these cards right here, which would tend to indicate fluid pound, okay, this is not efficient. We want a rectangular card, as previously mentioned, so we can see how efficiently we are actually operating this well. You might be getting all the production, but doing it in a very inefficient manner, or maybe your pump is completely worn out, so it takes 3 times as many strokes to get the same production if you had a new pump. So here's exactly an example of operating inefficiently. Here's a fluid pound stroke right here, which has about 50% fillage, as shown where the fluid load goes down to 0 here. So a dynamometer is going to help you to diagnose the pump performance and the causes of underperformance and or damage. So based on the shapes of these cards, we can see what's causing the underperformance. So if it's fluid pound, that just means that there's not enough liquid to fill the pump chamber, and we should be able to validate that with our fluid level shot. Or if we see that there's lots of fluid above the pump, but we have incomplete liquid fillage, it's probably going to be due to gas interference. So we can diagnose what the problem is. That way we can try to make adjustments in the way we're operating it or adjustments in our equipment design. And also with dynamometer, it's going to help us to regulate the runtime. So if you don't have a pump off controller, what timer should the well be on? Dynamometer is going to be very helpful in setting that timer. We can see what the rod loading is on a particular rod string. So what is the particular loading for the different tapers? And also we can calculate what the slippage is by doing a valve test, which we'll learn about in this course. So what's really amazing about these two tools that we're going to go into great depth on is the fact that you apply them here at surface and there's no risk. This is the so-called safe and effective, okay? Like the real safe and effective, not the Fauci type, right? But you can get a fluid level shot from surface, quickly installing it, and see where the top of the fluid level is and approximate quite accurately what the bottom hole pressures are. Okay, the best way to determine the bottom hole pressures is to have a bottom hole pressure gauge. And you could lower that down with wireline, but that's going to be very expensive and it has a lot of risk associated with it, as opposed to a simple, cheap fluid level shot. Also, for a dynamometer test, there's very little risk. This one at least has a little bit of risk installing it, but if you know what you're doing, it's not very risky at all, as opposed to putting a tool down hole. So we can really see down both sides of the well at a very cost-effective price, and we can also do it very quickly. You can do an effective analysis on a well within 30 minutes with both these tools and have a really complete picture as to what's happening down both sides, down the annulus and looking down the rod string. So the fluid level shot, remember, it tells you what the reservoir producing efficiency is. So these are diagrams coming out of the Echometer software, TAM. And so if you see this one right here, notice that it's always assuming, unless you tell the software otherwise, that the well is producing in steady state. And that means that there's going to be only oil above the pump intake and only water below it. Okay, so that's why you see the color difference here, where it's gray above and blue below, depending on where the pump intake is. You can see a little sliver of blue right here. And so that's not necessarily always the case, but it's making that default assumption. In this particular well right here, the well was not pumping. Okay, so it was a well that had a failure. They wanted to see where the static fluid level was. And on this particular one, the fluid level was at surface. And that's why it shows that we have oil up here to surface. That's not necessarily the case. It was mostly water. But anyways, so in this particular well, if you were producing a well like this, and I've actually seen wells in water floods where the fluid level is right at surface and it's just pure water all the way down. And so that means that you're not really tapping the reservoir potential. You're not pulling the fluid level down, right? So on this particular well, we are pulling the fluid level down. You see gas coming up here. And so as a result of that, the gas, since gas is lighter gradient, it's going to reduce the bottom hole pressure as opposed to a pure column of liquid like we see here. And then you can get to the eventual state of pumped off. Okay, pumped off meaning the fluid levels at the pump intake, we have the lowest bottom hole pressure. It's primarily just going to be what our surface casing pressure is. And so as a result, we're getting the maximum production from that reservoir. It is the reservoir producing efficiency. That's what we're seeing from the fluid level shot. Now the dynamometer test will tell us the mechanical producing efficiency. Remember, these are downhole pump cards, and if you don't understand them yet, a rectangle is the ideal card. So this is basically 100% efficient right here. This is what we want to see. Here's a pump that is heavily worn, indicated by the rounding here in the corners. It may be the effective portion. There might be no effective displacement with this pump. If there is, it's just going to be this part right here, maybe about 15%, something like that. Here's a gas interference. That is definitely a decrease in our efficiency, something we don't want. Or you could even have a hole in the pump barrel on a bottom hold down insert pump. And you can see that the fluid load is immediately released once that plunger goes by that particular hole. That is very inefficient in the way we're producing there. So we're only getting about 30% of the effective displacement that's possible for that particular pump. Also, we can see how effectively our stroke length is getting downhole. So with our surface card here and our downhole card here, if you look at these stroke lengths here, we're inputting 144-inch stroke length at surface, but our downhole stroke length is only 82 inches. So a lot of the input surface stroke length is lost due to rod stretch, and that's going to be based on what the fluid load is. So what is the diameter of the plunger, where is it set, and what the how stretchy the rod string is for the most part. So this is a well that has a oversized plunger. I believe it's 1 3/4 inches, and it's got a very stretchy rod string. And as a result of that, a lot of the input surface stroke length's just not getting transmitted downhole. And that's pretty inefficient in itself right there. Now here's one of the worst examples of that I've ever seen. This is off of POC, so excuse the bad picture right here. And there could be a little bit of distortion in this card, some card rotation if you know what that is. But anyways, I was just doing a fluid level shot on this particular well, and I was shocked when I saw this as the shutdown card. So here's the surface card, and it almost looks like that maybe the plunger's stuck in the orientation of that surface card. And here's what the downhole card looks like, and it shows here downtime due to pump fillage. So this is what the shutdown card looked like when the pump fillage dropped. And you can see this is a 120-inch input surface stroke length here. The downhole stroke length when it shut down due to low fillage was around 25 inches. This is what the card actually looked like when the well was pumping. So I saw that, I turned the well on, and the pump went to 100%, and it had about 35 to 40 inches of downhole stroke length. But still, that's terrible. Right? So we have 120 inches at surface, and we're only getting maybe 40 inches of stroke length downhole. That's inefficient in itself. We can see that with the dynamometer test. This is a bad design. You don't want that particular design. So fluid level and dynamometer test, this is what a fluid level shot is going to look like. Here's what the acoustic trace looks like. So we shoot a pressure pulse down the annulus, and there's a microphone at the bottom of that gun that's picking up all the sound waves that reflect back. And so this is where the shot is right here at time 0. These are all tubing collars right here, these little down kicks. Then you can see we have some different kicks going on down here. This is the TAC. We have two prominent up kicks here in this perforated interval, and then an up kick here for these perforations, and then the fluid level kick right here, which has the largest amplitude. And this is what the output from the software shows. So here's the TAC perfs. We could see these lower perfs right here, and the fluid level is right down in those perforations. After the fluid level shot, we do the casing pressure buildup test to approximate how much gas is flowing up the annulus, because we shut the gas in at surface, and we can approximate how much gas is coming in. This is very important, especially if the well is not pumped off, because it's going to approximate how much gas volume is in that liquid column. And we need that to calculate our gas-free liquid above the pump and also our bottom hole pressures. But when you do a fluid level shot, the most important thing to accurately determine the depth to the fluid level is first you need to identify the fluid level kick. So we're going to look at examples where you have these different kicks, and the question is, what is the fluid level kick? And there's various ways to eliminate some of the possibilities. Sometimes, a lot of times it's very obvious, the fluid level kick. And right here, this is the largest amplitude, but we'll see some where it's not so obvious. First, you have to be able to identify the fluid level kick. And secondly, you need to have the correct acoustic velocity. So once you identify the fluid level kick, we need to know how fast that pressure wave is traveling downhole. And so that's going to depend on the composition of the gas and the pressure and the temperature. There are different ways to compute that, 3 different ways in the software. We will talk about that. Now here are the outputs from a dynamometer test. This one's from a POC. Here's one from the echometer system. And you can see right here that the pump is worn, as shown by the shape of the cards. This one indicates some gas interference, and I can also see from the surface card that this unit is pumping pretty aggressively. Okay, it's kind of an unusual shaped surface card. I don't remember exactly what it was. It had a lot of fiberglass. It's not this rod string here, but it had a lot of fiberglass and it was set about 10,000 feet. I think it had about 7,000 feet of fiberglass, and it was running pretty fast. But I can tell that it's running fast based on the disparity or difference here between the peak polish rod load and the minimum polish rod load right here. But we're going to get dynamometer cards. We're also going to get rod loading. So if you look at the output here, this is 1-inch fiberglass rods. We got 4,400 feet of it. In the modified Goodman loading here using a 1.0 safety factor, so we're not derating for downhole corrosive conditions, it's 97%. So dynamometer test, we can see the rod loading, we can also see the dynamometer cards right here, and most people are focused on what's happening downhole, not necessarily the rod loading, because the rod loading is acceptable. We want to see what the cards look like to properly adjust or set our POC, or try to determine the causes of underperformance. Now, when it comes to dynamometer tests, to have accurate cards, you need accurate load and position data, okay? And that's going to be very critical, especially when it comes to POCs. There's also issues that can throw off the echometer equipment when it comes to polish rod bending. But it's very important that remember, the dynamometer is a recording, the surface card's a recording of the load and position. So this is the load on the y-axis. Here is the position right here. And so you want this stuff to be perfectly lined up, your load and your position. And if they're for some reason skewed to some degree, that happens quite frequently on POCs, you're going to get something called card rotation. The surface card will be skewed, and then when you calculate the downhole pump card, it's also going to be skewed as a result. So we need accurate load and position data, and then we also need the correct rod string. So we're recording at surface, and then we're calculating down through the rod string to see what's happening at the downhole plunger. And if you don't have the correct rod string, you're going to have some inaccuracies in your downhole card. So when we talk about optimization, you certainly don't want to overlook the value of a pump-off controller, okay? A POC, also known as a rod pump controller. And here's an example of one right here. And so a rod pump controller, this is a permanent dynamometer on your particular well, and as the pump fillage starts to drop, as we see in these 5 strokes, here's the first card, and then the fillage is going lower, and the fillage essentially is going to be where it hits the 0 line. So you'd start from 0 to where it intersects the 0 line. So this card right here has about 85%, maybe 80% fillage, but the fillage is dropping right here. It will shut the well down based on the threshold. So this one right here, the threshold to shut down is 80%. And it currently has 45% fillage in this final stroke, it says right here, and so it turned the well off, downtime due to pump fillage. So this is what a POC does. Remember, we can integrate that with a variable speed drive. Instead of just shutting it down, we can slow the well down. So some of the value, though, of a POC, it's not just in regulating runtime based on the fillage, but also we have load violations that can be tripped. So if you look at this card right here, it tripped out. It says downtime due to minimum load. It intersected, the service card intersected this dashed line right here at the red arrow. And if you look at this card, if you're not too experienced, you probably have no idea what these cards are telling you. But what these cards are telling you right here is that the rods are balled up in paraffin. So they're almost locked down in paraffin. They are still moving, but you want to get a hot oil truck out there quick and get that paraffin melted and out of the tubing. But it tripped out right here due to violating the minimum load. We could also do that with the peak load. We've got the malfunction set point. There's various different load violations. So if you have a failure, you can turn the well off. Also, there's historical data that we can use to look at when it comes to runtime or run cycles, which is helpful in getting feedback from the well and properly programming our particular controller. So gas and solid separation is absolutely critical too when it comes to optimizing. So here's our gas separator, and as fluid is being sucked into that separator, free gas is coming with it too. We only want that gas to go up the annulus, and as fluid is sucked down, each stroke, each upstroke, fluid is sucked down, and it progressively makes its way into this inner tube right here. This is our dip tube that feeds our pump. Okay, but we want to have enough downtime for this gas to bubble up and out of the separator. Otherwise, you will have gas interference. And it's quite common where you run a gas separator in conjunction with a solids separator, if the well also produces solids along with that particular gas. So if you look at this design right here, everything is going to come into these inlet slots, and hopefully all the free gas bubbles up and out, and then the liquid and solids would come down here to the desander, which is going to shake it, and ideally all the solids are going to fall down here and collect in these mud joints, and the free liquid is going to go up here to your pump right here. Now, if you don't separate the solids out, you can get them in your valves, and you can have delayed fluid pickup or delayed traveling valve closure, like we see right here. Also, the solids are eventually going to cut up your plunger. You're going to get worn cards that are indicated by the rounding. You can see a worn pump right here. So there are some various different things when it comes to separating the gas and solids out. And then if you can't separate it out, there's different things you can do with your pump. And in section 10, we go into all sorts of detail on different gas and solid separators on the market. Also some different possibilities on pump designs or components that you can install to minimize the effect of both gas and solids. Here's one example of those. This is called the sand diverter, and it's basically a tight top plunger adapter. So it would go right above the top of your plunger right here, and it's got a really tight fit between the outside of this device and the ID of the barrel, and that is to try and prevent solids from falling down to the top leading edge of your plunger. So there's some different things you can do. We'll look at some different options to try and minimize the effects of both free gas and solids that are going through your system. So let's take a look at some examples right now. I'm going to show you 3 examples of how you can optimize wells. They're pretty basic, but what information we get with our diagnostic tools and how we can apply that to optimize the profitability of our particular wells. So I'm going to show you a series of tests that I did on a particular well for a particular customer, and they ended up becoming one of my best customers, and potentially it's due to the value of the data that we were getting from it. So I was doing a little bit of work for them, and then I found this particular well, and they started applying me a lot more and had me checking lots more wells. So anyways, this goes back to 2016. So they had recently had acquired some leases, and there was this one well that was kind of standing off on its own, just one well going to one particular tank battery. And so they said, go check it out. It's running 100%. Okay, so it's running 9.5 strokes per minute, 86-inch stroke length, and it's a pretty good well. It was an older well, and it's making 20 barrels of oil a day. But they said, hey, it's running 100%. We don't know if we're under-pumping it, over-pumping it. We don't know if the pump's worn. Just see what it looks like. And when I tested the well, I found that it had 6,000 feet of G-flap here. Okay, and if you don't know what G-flap is, this is gas-free liquid above the pump. This is a very important parameter right here. And what it means is how much liquid is above the pump intake. Okay, so you might have a gaseous fluid column. In this case, it doesn't show gas in the illustration because it wasn't making gas. But if we had gas that was producing, that gas is going to occupy a certain amount of volume in the annulus. And the G-flap here represents, if we were to take that gas volume out, how much of the gaseous column height above the pump intake is just pure liquid. And we want to know that because the liquid is primarily what contributes to the bottom hole pressure. Also, our pump is primarily designed to only move liquid. We can pump gas through it, but we call that gas interference. We don't want to do that. So anyways, I shot it and I said, hey guys, have you had some recent downtime? I mean, I'm seeing a ton of fluid here in it, or maybe did you do a recent hot oil treatment or pump something down the backside, which would cause it to be loaded up? Because I'm seeing 6,000 feet of gas-free liquid above the pump, which is a ton. And they said, no, everything's been running normal. The well's been running steady. We haven't pumped anything down it. And they said, thanks for the information. We're going to try and get it and see what happens. And so very quickly after that, they upsized the pumping unit. It was a couple days after that, and then they sent me back out. This test here is about 3 weeks later. So the well's still running 100%. And if we look at the pumping parameters here, it's running a little bit faster with a longer stroke length now. So they got a Mark II pumping unit on it now, and it's got a 120-inch stroke length here at surface. And now they've pumped it down to some degree. We've got 3,600 feet of gas-free liquid, and now their production rate is 50 barrels of oil a day. Okay, I'm not showing you what the production rate is on the water. Of course, the water rate is also going up as well, but they've pumped it down to some degree, but there's still a ton of fluid. And so there's a bunch of tests that I'm going to skip here, but they continue to pump the well with this pumping unit. I continue to do some testing on it. It held plenty of fluid above the pump. So they eventually upsize the pumping units, and this is skipping about 6 or 7 months right here, going to 2017. The well is still running 100%. They're back to a conventional pumping unit. Now they have 8 strokes per minute with 192-inch stroke length. So they've upsized the pumping unit 3 times. Okay, now we have 800 feet of gas-free liquid above the pump, and now they're making 80 to 100 barrels of oil per day. So they've basically 5x'd their production rate, 4 to 5x it. But we still have some fluid above the pump intake, and this is what it looks like in that particular condition. So as they've been pumping it more aggressively, they pulled the fluid level down, but they still have some going on, and you can see there's some free gas that's floating around here. And now, as a result of the high production rate, they're starting to pull some gas into the pump intake, and the pump fillage is 85 to 90% due to this gas interference right here. And what they decide is the next time that we pull this well, we're going to sump the pump intake, meaning they're going to put the pump intake below the bottom perforations. And then we're going to do that for 2 reasons. One, to eliminate this gas interference. And secondly, since they're pumping the fluid level down, if they can drop the seating nipple, they can take more of the hydrostatic pressure off of the formation here to get even more production. And this is what it looked like after they subbed the pump. And so if you look here, you can see there's some things going on with the tubing and the casing. The pump intake's below it, and if I blow this up, so they have 5.5-inch casing right here, and they have a 4-inch liner. And so in order to get the tubing down there, this is 2 7/8, they had to cross over to 2 3/8 tubing to get that intake down here below the bottom perforation. But they were successful in doing that. And after getting the pump intake below the perforations, the pump cards went to 100%. So the gas interference was completely gone at that particular point right there. And they continued to pump the well in this condition for about another 4 to 6 months. And eventually they got the well to being completely pumped off. And here is the evidence of that. Here is the fluid level shot. And you can see we've got some kicks down here where we go from 2 7/8 to 2 3/8. We've got some kicks from perforation. And then here is our fluid level kick right here at our seating nipple. They got the well fully pumped off. So you can see the value of getting feedback from your well and making adjustments. So whatever company sold them this well had no idea what the potential was of this well. And they got this well at a discount and they paid it off quick because whoever sold it to them was basing the economics on the price of that particular well on 20 barrels of oil per day. And they got the production rate. It was 80 to 100 here. After they got it fully pumped off, it stabilized around 100 barrels of oil per day. So basically 5x. So by getting feedback, and then we had some gas interference, we came up with a plan, we sumped the pump, okay? We continued to make adjustments to the well. We were able to stabilize that production 5x higher. So pretty amazing, pretty good well, and that's potentially why they become one of my best customers. So here's a second example. Okay, so this is a well that is pumped off, and pumped off means the fluid level is down here at the pump intake. And here's a series of cards. This is about 80 cards. Okay, so this particular well has 100% fillage. The cards look like this. And when it starts to pump off, you start to get that panhandle shape right here. So here's an example. In all of these cards moving from right to left, these are all fluid pound cards, and the fillage is slowly getting lower and lower with each stroke. So that panhandle is getting longer and longer as we start to move from right to left here. So fluid pound is where there's not sufficient liquid to fill the pump intake, and so the plunger is holding the fluid load on the downstroke, and then it violently releases that fluid load basically right as it runs into the fluid. It actually happens a little bit before it impacts the fluid, but we don't need to get too technical. And what that's going to do is that's going to potentially create some compressive waves down here on the bottom of the rod string, which is going to be damaging both to your rod string. Also, it's going to create more rod-on tubing contact. So you're going to potentially exacerbate tubing leaks as a result of that. It's damaging for the valves of your pump, and that shock wave goes all the way up your rod string up to your gearbox. So it's damaging for the whole system. We don't want to do it. We want to turn the well off. When there's not enough liquid to fill the pump, turn it off, allow for the fluid level to rise, and then we'll turn it back on later. So for this particular well right here, the well was pumped off and it was averaging 80% runtime with a 5-minute down cycle. Okay, and as a result of that, it had the run cycles it had per day. A run cycle is when it turns on one time. So it'd turn on and then it would pump off and then turn off. That's one run cycle. It had 58 run cycles per day. Okay, and the operator liked 70% fillage set point. And as a result, for this particular well, this was really damaging because the fillage dropped very slowly as the well started to pump off. That's not necessarily the case for all wells, but for this particular well, it dropped very slowly. And so 70% fillage set point is really bad. So the POC is basically looking for the fillage to drop below this threshold, and that's when it determines to turn the well off. And as a result of that, this particular well was pounding fluid the last 40 strokes. So this is 100%, and then as the fillage starts to drop right here, these are all fluid pound strokes of increasingly lower fillage as we start to move from right to left. And so the fluid pound strokes per day, so if the run cycle that I watched right here, I recorded with my dynamometer, is representative of what it normally does. So the fluid pound strokes per day, it's going to be 40 fluid pound strokes at the end of each run cycle. We have 58 run cycles occurring per day. That means that this particular well is pounding fluid 2,300 times per day, 2,300 strokes. Okay, that's a lot of fluid pound strokes. So how do we optimize this particular well? Well, it's incredibly simple. Okay, as long as you have the feedback from the well, right? The easiest thing to do here is increase the fillage set point. Okay, so we only have, for example, 5 light fluid pound strokes per day. So instead of having that 70% fillage set point that they liked in this well that was extremely damaging, let's pull that up much higher here. So we get up here to maybe like 94% fillage set point. So as soon as that fillage starts to drop just a little bit, it's going to rapidly shut down. Now we only have 5 very light fluid pound strokes for the end of each run cycle. Okay, so just by doing that, I took the number of fluid pound strokes per day and basically divided it by 10. We only have a tenth of it almost right now, just from that one simple change. A second change that I made was increasing the downtime from 5 minutes to 15 minutes. Okay, instead of having that very short downtime where we have all of these run cycles, remember on a POC, in order for it to go to downtime, it has to pound fluid. If I can give it a little bit longer downtime, the fluid level will build a little bit higher, it'll have a longer run cycle, and therefore we don't have to pound fluid as much. So if I increase the downtime 3x, basically I'm going to divide this number here by 3, and now we can take it down to 96 fluid pound strokes per day. So as a result of these two changes on the POC, there's a reduction of 96% of the fluid pound strokes, and it's got more gentle fluid pound strokes. And this particular well held its production with these changes right here. So it didn't affect production, and we're minimizing our wasted energy, minimizing our damaging fluid pound strokes. So we're going to have a longer run life as a result, and no downside to it. Okay, let's look at one more example. So this particular well right here, it's got an 1.25 inch pump at 10,000 feet, and it's running relatively slowly, 5.4 strokes per minute, 142-inch stroke length at surface. So the engineer tells me, he calls me up and says, hey, I noticed we're constantly carrying 2,000 feet of gas-free liquid above the pump, so I want to make the following changes. He says, I want to upsize the pump from 1.25 inches to 1.75 inches, and I want to increase the strokes per minute from 5.4 to 7.5. Okay, now when he told me that, I knew this particular well, and I was thinking, I don't know if that's a good idea. But he said, here are the RodStar simulations, and I thought, okay, well, let me take a look at it and just see what it says before I tell him what my thoughts are. This was a unique well. So he said, here's the existing design. So the way that it's currently running with these particular parameters right here, and he's simulating it with the 2,000 feet of G-flap, the gas-free liquid above the pump. Okay, so this is what it looks like, and he's simulating with 90% fillage right here, so assuming a little bit of gas interference. And he says, this is the current design, the way it's operating, and this is where I want to take it. So the proposed design, where we have the larger pump and running faster, you can see the surface card has changed quite dramatically. It's the blue one right here relative to this surface card, and that's due to the fact that it's doing a lot more work. We have a bigger plunger, and we also have more dynamics due to running faster. Now here he's simulating it with 1,000 feet of gas-free liquid above the pump. So he's assuming we're not going to pump the well off, even with these getting more aggressive in producing it. We're only going to pump it down to a certain degree. Again, simulating with the 90% fillage set point. Okay, so this is the way it currently is, and this is the way I want to take it. The only problem is that this is the way it actually currently is. These are diagnostic cards. Okay, so with the current design, this is what it actually looks like. Diagnostic cards means that I'm actually out in the field and I'm acquiring dynamometer cards on this particular well, and this is how they're drawing right here. So he's saying this is how the well currently looks in his simulation in his air-conditioned office, and I'm saying, yeah, you're simulating that, but this is actually how it looks right here. Now, what's going on with this particular well? So you can see that it's got a huge calculated fluid load on the plunger. It should not be that high, but what's happening is, and we can see it here from the slant of these particular cards right here, this well has lots of deviation higher up in the hole. Okay, so somewhere higher up on this particular well, there's lots of dog legs and it's crooked, and this is creating lots of rod-on tubing drag friction. And this is distorting the shape of the calculated downhole pump card, because the echometer system in all the POCs currently in existence are using the one-dimensional wave equation. And what that means is, so if you're looking at an echometer system or a POC currently, okay, it's going to be using the one-dimensional wave equation, which means it is not designed to account for rod-on tubing friction if you have deviation. Okay, and so if there is deviation, this is going to distort the calculation of what's happening down here at the plunger. And that's why we get this crazy slant. We also have a fluid load, a calculated fluid load that is way higher than it should be. Okay, and I don't want to go into too much detail on that. I could say some more, but let me tell you the difference between this one right here. So this is a deviated rod start run. It's using the three-dimensional, is the so-called three-dimensional rod simulation, and it's taking into account the rod on tubing friction, but this is just a model. It is a simulation. Okay, they are using some assumptions in mathematics to calculate what should be happening and what the rod on tubing drag friction is, but those models have not been necessarily validated to this day, and so they're much closer to the answer than the one-dimensional model, but sometimes they're not necessarily right. And if you compare the different 3D models that are out there and run the exact same well and simulate them, you will see differences in the output there because they're just doing mathematics behind the scene. But what's interesting here, so in this particular example, the downhole card potentially in the simulation is going to be more correct because it should be accounting for some of that rod on tubing friction. But if this simulation is properly modeling the well, then the surface card that they are simulating with the same parameters that the well has, it's got 2,000 feet of gas-free liquid, okay? It should closely resemble what I'm recording out there in the field. So if I take this surface card and I overlay it here, it should properly match. And if I draw that card over, you can see that in no way does it match at all. So there's something happening that is not properly being accounted for in this particular model. So what does that say about the predictive rod simulation? Well, it's not properly modeling what's actually happening. So you have, the map, and then you have the terrain. Okay, this is the terrain, and this is supposed to be the map of what the terrain looks like, but it doesn't look like the terrain, so we have to go with the particular terrain. So there's something wrong here in the model, or maybe there was something wrong here in the input. And before I did this recording, I actually went back to these RodStar simulations in my email just to verify, did the engineer actually put in the deviation survey into this particular well? Could that explain what was wrong here? And he did put the deviation survey in. Maybe he put the wrong deviation survey in. I don't necessarily know, but there is one in there. And this is what it looks like for the dogleg severity on this particular well. So the dogleg severity is how many degrees is it changing in its direction. So this is looking at the deviation of the wellbore. So it's degrees per 100 feet. So how much is it changing around? You can see they made a big mistake drilling this well. This is a well on a single pad, one well for one pad, and it is extremely deviated right here, right below surface for some reason. There's a huge dog leg, also another big one right here, and there's some other ones, but it's not the worst well I've ever seen. So maybe the deviation survey does not have enough clarity to it. So the spacing on the data points on the recordings of the deviation are not sufficient in order to accurately pick up everything that's actually happening. But he did include that in the actual model. So there's just something wrong right here. So basically he tells me I want to do all of this, and he says this is what it's going to be, and I'm saying I don't think it's going to be like that because that's not what I'm seeing in the field. So I tell him no, I don't think you should do what you're proposing. Maybe you should upsize to 1.5 inches. Don't go to 1.75 inches, or maybe you can even raise the rod string a little bit and upsize the pump to kind of offset the weight, the increase in fluid load by dropping the weight of the rod string, or maybe you just increase the strokes per minute. Maybe you just do something else, as opposed to what you're actually proposing there. And then I thought about it and I said, you know what? Actually, I like science experiments. Maybe we should try this, what you're proposing. But after I told him all this information, he said, no, maybe we don't. We'll just kind of keep the well running the same way it is. So anyways, this is the importance of getting feedback from your well, as opposed to especially just simulating what the well looks like. Let's go get some diagnostic cards. We got to go out to the field, or at least pull data off our POC, our pump off controller, into our office so we can actually see what the cards actually look like. But that is the value of our diagnostic tools. So the fluid level gun and the dynamometer, they help to paint the downhole picture. So here's my Dyno King when he gets angry and he gets his gun out. But don't worry, it's just a fluid gun. Okay, it's the Dyno King with his fluid gun. Do not worry. But they paint the downhole picture. Remember, they're looking down two different sides of the well, and they're telling us two different types of efficiency. Are we getting all the production? And how efficiently are we getting the production mechanically with our system? So let's talk about failures real quick, because I'll be talking about this all throughout the course, and I expect you to understand what I'm saying here. So the most common types of failures that you're going to have are going to be either a pump failure, a rod part, or a tubing leak. So a pump failure is going to be where something in your pump breaks. It could be a ball or seat. It could be one of the cages for your valves, or potentially the top of the plunger, the valve rod broke. Something like that broke and your pump is going to stop operating. We could have a rod part where somewhere on that rod string it breaks apart. Therefore, the reciprocation up and down that we're putting in is not activating the downhole plunger, and therefore we're not going to be producing anything to surface. And maybe everything is working, our rod string and our downhole plunger, but we have a tubing leak. If you have a tubing leak that forms, all the fluid in your tubing is going to drain out of that. So your pump still might be working, it's just going to lift fluid, after the tubing drains, it would only lift fluid up to that leak, and then it's going to circulate around and down. These are the most common types of failures. Now, other failures, things that are not as common, and this one actually is pretty common. This is trash in a pump valve. So if you have trash in a pump valve, that could be either due to frac sand or formation sand, or maybe some rubbers or something from a rod guide that gets stuck in one of your valves. If that happens and one of your valves is inoperable, it's not going to displace any fluid. And I like to differentiate this from a pump failure, because a lot of times you can remediate this from surface. You can maybe pump some surfactant and fluid from surface to try and flush the pump. You can also put the pump on a tag to try and dislodge those particular solids. You can have rods that get stuck in paraffin. So the upper part of your rods right here, if they get bound up in paraffin, that can end up leading to what's called a stripping job, which is quite messy, but your rods get stuck in paraffin and you're trying to basically pull rods and tubing out at the same time in a very messy job. You can have a plugged pump intake. So in this illustration right here, if you had enough sand that actually came around the outside of your tubing, and that's preventing the liquid here from actually getting sucked up into the pump intake. Now, typically a plugged pump intake is going to happen in your gas separator. So if you fill it up with solids, or it could be your desander, but if it fills up with solids, and you don't have enough capacity to carry any more solids before it starts to cover up the pump intake, it's going to restrict the ability of fluid to flow into the standing valve there. And as a result of that, it could be completely plugged off, as we see in this illustration, or maybe there might be like a little wormhole that's still feeding the pump, and you could have a partially plugged pump. So maybe your pump only fills with 75% of liquid, but the other 25% it can't fill with because it does not have enough time due to the pressure drop occurring due to that small hole that the fluid is trying to work its way through. And then another type of failure, and this is probably more than just a failure, this is kind of catastrophic, is a casing leak. So if you have a water zone somewhere behind your pipe, okay, especially disposal zones where you're injecting the produced water, okay, there's going to be a flow occurring behind the casing right here, and this is going to corrode the casing, especially if there's no cement here to protect it, and eventually it will pop a hole and it's going to flood out your well. And so you're going to have to go down and try to find where that leak is and squeeze it off with cement to remediate that and get your well back to production. So these are the most common types of failures right here. Let's look at different types of failure mechanisms. And we're talking about this here because when you talk about optimization, a lot of times we're focused on extending run life. And I just want to make sure everybody understands some of these basic principles. We'll go into more detail in this later on in the course. But you can have mechanical wear. So mechanical wear, we've all seen this before, where you have rods or a rod box that's rubbing on the inside of your tubing. That's what we're looking at here. And this is a tubing split. So you can see where the rod box track is rubbing up and down. You can also see there's some general corrosion occurring outside of the rod wear track. And so this is going to be rod on tubing wear. And you can see a rod box here that's worn not just down to the threads, but through the threads. And I remember pulling this out. This was actually where the rod string split into two. And I was amazed that this rod box held up until this particular point. Eventually it wore out and it opened up a little bit in the threads on the rod string pulled out. But you can see how heavily it's worn. That's due to mechanical wear, typically associated with deviation. So another failure mechanism would be corrosion. Okay, so this is going to be corrosion here on the outside of a tubing collar. And you can see it's kind of nice and uniform all around due to corrosive fluids. Here's an outside-in tubing leak. Now, this is not too common. So typically when you have tubing leaks, it's from the inside out because we have reciprocating rods. Now, this particular one indicates that there was something corrosive jetting out onto it. You can kind of see successive layers of where the metal was worn away. You can also see there's kind of some colonies right here. Looks like there might have been some bacteria, but these two huge holes right here, this is due to some corrosive fluid jetting out on it. Now, this is general corrosion kind of occurring right here, and I want to contrast that with bacterial pitting. So this is some bacterial pits. You can see it's basically pits within pits. This was a bacteria colony. that attached to the rod right here. And what it does, it attaches to the rod, it eats hydrocarbons, and there's several different types of bacteria, but they eat hydrocarbons and they crap out either CO2 or H2S, which can be quite devastating because bacteria pitting is kind of drilling straight down either into your rods or your tubing, so it can quickly cause a rod part or a tubing leak. And it's worse than just kind of general corrosion, which is uniformly wearing away the surface of the steel right there. So this is under deposit corrosion right here. So if you see all these black spots, there are actually colonies underneath all of these, and these black spots are the byproducts of the corrosion. And the only reason you can see this one is that I took a wire brush with some diesel and I was cleaning it out to try and see what it looked like, but we had a rod string that was just full of this right here. And you got to be very careful with bacterial pitting, because if you introduce it into your well, they can basically replicate and start to spread, or at least spread all throughout your system, and they're going to cause lots of issues. You need a biocide to try and kill them. So you can also have mechanical fatigue, and this is going to be applicable to rod strings. Okay, as we pick up and release that fluid load, eventually the rods are going to cycle out and they're going to break at the weak point on that particular rod string or that particular taper. Here's a fiberglass rod body break, and this is the so-called broom effect that happens where it shatters into a bunch of little strands, and this makes it difficult to fish. I don't know if it actually broke in that way, or maybe some of this damage was due to the fishing operation, because that's a pretty big broom. You don't usually see it that bad there, but apparently something happened with this fiberglass and it probably cycled out, unless it was damaged in some regard. And here's an example of fatigue where this rod, which was likely buckling, because if you see a break occurring right here, right before the upset bead, that usually indicates that the box is on the tubing and it's flexing a little bit right here. So there's just a little bit of a flex that's occurring right here once it comes down to this diameter, and that is where it parted right here. And that can happen due to just enough cycles where you have a little bit of a bend occur. Just like if you take a paper clip and you kind of bend it out and close it, after enough times it's going to eventually break due to mechanical fatigue. And then we can also have solids and scale. So we've seen solids in our valves, and that's going to be devastating also for our plunger. Scale, here's some scale on the outside of some tubing. Okay, and scale is not necessarily bad in itself. It's not necessarily corroding the pipe, but it's preventing the corrosion inhibitor from creating an effective film on the outside of the tubing. So for example, in this case, your tubing is going to be exposed to the corrosive fluids. Here's some other images. This is a flow line that we broke open that's just completely full of scale. So this is where the ID of the pipe should be, right here where my mouse is, and you can see how much of it is restricted due to scale. And we opened this because we were seeing excessive back pressure at the well, and this is what we found. Here's some heavy pitting on some tubing collars. This looks like CO2 pitting, because they always say that's kind of like an ice cream scoop, and it looks like somebody just scooped out some of the steel right here, but really bad pitting. Here's some more wear on tubing where it's cut paper thin due to rod on tubing wear. So here's a joint of tubing, and this is a bacteria pit right here, which ended up causing the hole on this one. You can see we got some pitting associated on both sides. Other than that, though, it's nice full-bodied tubing, and that's why bacterial pitting can be so devastating. It's not like tubing wear here, where it's all worn down, paper thin, and it opens. It just kind of drilled straight through this tubing that caused the leak. And here's some really bad rods that have some bad pitting associated with them, all up and down on this particular rod string. So these are all failure mechanisms right there. Of course, we want to do anything we can to extend run life. A lot of this is going to be associated with the chemical treatment, or necessarily preventing bacteria from getting inside there, but there's certainly things that we can do when it comes to optimizing well. We'll talk about how to deal with rod on tubing wear in section 13 with some specialty equipment. And of course, we want to optimize our POC settings and prevent tagging, and just overall the way we run our well to try and minimize some of these failures to keep the pulling unit off of them. So failure reduction, how do we extend run life and minimize failures? Well, I have good news. It actually only takes 3 different things. Okay, first you need a good equipment design. So you need the appropriate type of pumping units. Okay, you need to be running the proper strokes per minute. You need the correct rod string. Do you want fiberglass or all steel? What are the diameters, the tapers? What is the grade of rod, the grade of steel rods? You want the proper pump design. You want a good downhole gas and solid separator. This is all a part of your equipment design. So have a good equipment design for a particular well. Then you need to protect the downhole equipment. That is going to be our chemical treatment. So when we talk about a corrosion inhibitor film, this is what it looks like. So this is the metal surface. Imagine that as your steel or your rod right there. And these polar molecules are attached to it. This is the corrosion inhibitor, and they have a head with a tail. Okay, and this creates a thin oil film, okay, kind of microscopic. And the whole purpose of a corrosion inhibitor is to keep the corrosive fluid, the corrosive water and gas, from contacting the rods or tubing. So it creates a thin film to prevent the corrosive fluids from contacting it. And so this is why it's bad if you have rod on tubing wear, or if you have lots of turbulence, it will wipe away this corrosion inhibitor film and you will not have protection. But anyways, back to this here. So good equipment design, then protect your equipment with a good chemical treatment, and then you need good operations. There's a few more things in here. So we want to optimize our POC settings in our runtime. So for example, make every stroke count. We don't want wasteful or damaging strokes, as we saw in the example where we raised our fillage set point. You want to avoid tagging and fluid pound, very damaging strokes. So this is a very hard tag right here. A 10,000 pound tag is occurring due to the pump being spaced too close. So it's hitting itself, but all the rods right above that pump are going into compression, or at least a large percentage of them are. And this is going to create lots of bending on the rods, but also rod on tubing wear. This is going to accelerate your failure rate right here. So you'd want to avoid this if at all possible. Resolve gas interference. I can't say it enough. Here's some heavy gas interference, and this is almost a gas locked card. Okay, like true technical gas lock. It's not though, because the traveling valve opens right here, but effectively this stroke right here is doing nothing. It is not going to displace anything. This is a worthless stroke where we're wasting the life of our equipment. We're also wasting electricity and burning up our packing. So we want to resolve gas interference if at all possible, which is not always easy. That's why we're going to talk about it at great detail later in the course. And then also you want to identify design changes. So for example, this is one thing that drives me crazy. Okay, so you'll find a well that's running at 10 strokes per minute with 144-inch stroke length. It's running fast, but it's only running 50% of the day. And the question is, why are we running it so fast for such a short percentage of the day? Why don't we slow it down? Maybe it needed to run at this speed when it was running 85, 90%, 100% of the day, but nobody ever came back, evaluated the well, and decided that we need to slow it down. Let's take it down to 7 strokes per minute. Okay, we'll bump up the runtime to 75%, and the well's going to be running slower and smoother. We'll have a longer run life as a result. So you want to adjust your strokes per minute as needed for the conditions. Maybe you might need to adjust your seating nipple depth. Do we need to raise it up higher for some reason, or is it time to drop it down on bottom now that the well's pumped off? Also, our pump design, lots of things that we can do with our pump design, as we'll talk about later on in the course. So now for a safety moment, Deputy Dan, what are you doing here? Oh man. So this is Deputy Dan. I guess I'll give you an introduction. So he's the safety coordinator here at Downhole Diagnostic. But Dan, I didn't know you were in the course. I didn't know you were sneaking a slide here in my presentation. So I guess you got something on your mind, Dan. What is it? Oh, that's right. Safety first. That's a great idea. Well, let's talk about safety very quickly before we jump off to the next section. So we're about to talk about fluid level shots. You want to be careful with H2S. You're going to have gas that you bleed back from your gun, and you don't want to get knocked down or die from H2S. I have known people that have been knocked down from H2S by accidentally breathing it after they bled it off their fluid level gun. You don't want to do that, because it will kill you right there. Also, as we work around pumping units, be cautious. Remember, this equipment starts automatically. So keep that in mind. If you're kind of reaching around in there in the belt guard around a shiv and that unit turns on, it'll mangle your fingers right here. You don't want to do that. And also, if you're going to be working underneath that pumping unit, make sure you got your hard hat on like I do right here. But even if you have your hard hat on and that horse head doesn't get you, watch out for those counterweights. They can just right in the back of the head like this poor sap right here. Okay, so hopefully you learned something here in the safety moment. We like to keep it nice, short, and sweet here at Downhole Diagnostic. So that is the end of this section, my friend. Where are we going next? Well, this is what we're going to talk about. So remember, we're about to get into the meat and potatoes. We are done with the introductory sections now, and we are going to jump off into fluid level shots in the next section. And then after that, we're going to talk about pumps and rod operation to prime us for the first dynamometer section. Then we'll go back to fluid level shots part 2, and then to dynamometer part 2. So you're doing great. Let's keep it up, and I'll see you in the next section.